This is a story called The Frog Groom, and it's from the Himalaya region of India. And you might be familiar with this story. It's similar to the Grimm's Ein Heinrich or The Frog King. And it was performed in Vienna in Brunnen Passage in the spring of 2014.
I like the twist. I like stories that are different. And this story starts off with a merchant's wife. She had a little lamp room where she would go in and she would light lamps and she would pray. Pray for her husband. Pray for herself. Pray for her neighbours. Pray for family. Pray for friends. Pray for the neighbour's goat. She would pray every day and light those lamps religiously as a ritual. And one day, as she was there, she was spinning with a spindle. And as she was spinning, she felt an itch on her foot. So she scratched her foot. And that itch became worse, and she scratched it a bit more. And a blister formed on her foot. And sometime later, from that blister, appeared a little frog. And the frog sat on her lap as she was spinning and said, "Hello." And she said, "Oh, you're beautiful. Mela-da-doo, 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 my frog. Mela-da-doo, mela-da-doo." And she placed him against her chest. Mela-da-doo, mela-da-doo. And he just looked up and, "Hello." He was beautiful. And from that day onwards, when she would be doing her work, that frog, like a child, would be like hipping and hopping and hopping and hopping and skipping around her feet, just like a child gets around your feet. When she was doing her washing, he'd be there passing her the soap. Always helpful, always trying to be a good frog. And that frog, like all children, I suppose, grew older and grew up. And the merchant's wife says to her husband, she says, "You know, husband," she says, "I go to my friends' houses and I go to the neighbours' houses. And you know what? And all the neighbours, they have daughter-in-laws. And their daughter-in-laws are all beautiful. And their daughter-in-laws help them with all the household chores. And the daughter-in-laws help them and talk to them about their happy times and their sad times. I would love to have a daughter-in-law." And the husband said, "Wife, usually the protocol is like this. If you're going to have a daughter-in-law, you normally need a son." And she says, "Well, I've got a son." And he says, "That frog." And she says, "Yeah, I want a wife for my frog." He says, "Oh, Bagal Hogia, she wants a wife for her frog. Oh." He says, "What's wrong with you? Do frogs get married as well?" She says, "Well, yeah, we can get married. We're unconventional." And every day she would light lamps, hoping for a beautiful daughter-in-law that would not only make a great wife, but also make a great daughter-in-law that she could share her joys and sorrow with. And finally, she nagged her husband so much that he said to the household priest, he says, go and arrange a wedding." So he went. And he went from place to place to place, and finally in some neighbouring kingdom he found another merchant who was of a similar position. And the merchant had one daughter, and she was a bright, sharp daughter. And she agreed. She agreed to the wedding, and the father agreed to the wedding. And the priest says, the only thing is, he says, the bridegroom, our boy, he won't be coming in person. He will send a dagger in his place. And he says, that's not a problem at all, because in those days, apparently that's what they used to do. Symbolically, if the bridegroom couldn't make it, a dagger would be sent in his place, and the dagger would be wrapped in a fabric that was the same colour as his turban. So that's what happened. The wedding took place. The wedding took place, and after some time, of course, the daughter-in-law had to go and meet her husband. And when she came to the house, well, she was beautiful. She had the mehndi on her hand, and the mehndi was still bright and vivid. She had sparkling eyes and surma around her eyes, and she had a beautiful tikka on her forehead that glistened, that gold tikka. And as she went in, her heart was beating because she was going to meet her husband for the first time. She looked here, she looked there, she looked in this room, she looked in the garden, and she couldn't see her husband. She thought, how strange is this? And all she could see was this little frog. She said, "Get out of my way." This way and that way, everywhere. And she thought, well, maybe he's gone away. Maybe he's shy. But 2-3 days passed, a week passed, and she realized there's no husband here. And she was very sad. She would cry herself to sleep every night. Every night she was sad. Now, a strange thing would happen, because every morning her mother-in-law would go to bathe in the river. And she would take her soap, and she would take her oil, and she would take a towel, and she would put the frog in the room with the lamps. And she'd always say to her daughter-in-law, she goes, "Don't go into that room, don't open that door, don't go into that room. I want to have a bath now, don't open that door, don't go into that room." And every day the daughter-in-law thinks, she's always saying this to me. There must be something more than just privacy. So one morning, as the mother-in-law went to bathe and she was washing herself, the bride went into the room. She opened the door and she entered the lamp room. And there were several lamps in the semi-darkness. And the little flames were flickering. And when she looked, there he was, completely naked. Prayer beads in his hands, saying his prayers. And there she saw something green and shiny. It was the frog skin. And she said, all this time you've been deceiving me. I've been looking for you everywhere, thinking you'd gone away. And you've been right here under my nose. I'm going to burn this thing up now. She grabbed the frog skin. And he says, please, don't burn it. Don't burn it on this day. If you want things to be right, you have to do the right rituals. Just like my mother lit lamps and prayed. Please, do this thing. When the merchant returns from his business, say to him this. Say, organize a feast. Have beautiful food cooked, but do not get anybody to serve it. And when the time is right on that particular day of a full moon day, he has to shout my name and say, son, come and feed my guests. And his son will come and feed his guests. And then we'll be rid of the skin. Please tell him to do this one thing for me. Do this ritual. And she agreed. And then she looked at him. And she saw the shadows dancing around his nakedness. And he saw her eyes twinkling in the lamplight. And there was a strange bit of bijli, electricity. And he said, well, what do we do now? She says, well, we've got a bit of time. And he looked at her and he said, Pachisi? And she said, Pachisi. So they started playing that ancient board game, rolling the dice. And sometimes he would be winning, and sometimes she would be winning. So focused were they on each other. So focused were they on each other's moves and trying to anticipate each other's moves. And sometimes, well, sometimes she was on top. And sometimes he was on top. Oh, and they pachisied each other for many, many hours. And at the end of that session of pachisi, the sweat was pouring off as she dressed herself and re-plaited her hair and flicked her ponytail to the back just in time for the mother-in-law to come back. She goes, oh, hello, Charles. Ooh, you got a smile on your face. Haven't seen a smile on your face. She says, yes, I have a new pastime, mother-in-law. So the next day, that's exactly what happened. As she went out to bathe, the young couple would play pachisi for many hours. Well, after some time, the merchant returned, and the daughter-in-law ran to him, and she said, this is what you must do, please. We must hold a feast. And he says, a feast to celebrate what? She says, to celebrate you having a son. And he says, oh, not that super silly talk again. We've not had a son before. Am I going to have a son now? He says, no, please, do this. Do this, make the most finest food. Do not let any men serve it. Lay it out, invite every single person in the village, and then call out for your son. And you will have a son, I promise you. And the father said, well, the merchant said, if nothing else, well, a feast is a celebration of joy, and joy, it's good to celebrate joy. So that's what happened. On the day of a full moon, 3 of the most beautiful curries were laid out, and all the villagers sat there. And then, at the right time, he said, Puttar, mere prone aaya, my guest has come. Aja rotiyan nu khilao, feed them now. First, there was nothing. And then they heard a door unfastening, and another door. And out stepped the young man. And all the young women went, oh, he's lovely. And some of the old women also went, oh, he is. And he came and he touched the feet of his elders, and they touched his head as a blessing. Then he washed their feet and their hands, and he started serving them that food. And then he gave them kheer afterwards, the most beautiful rice pudding with sultanas and almonds in. And by the end of that feast, by the end of that meal, well, everybody embraced him and everybody loved him as if he was their son, their long-lost son. And that family, their prayers had been answered by the lamps. And that's why that lady lit lamps with an open heart every single day. Those lamps had been good to them. And that couple had a lifetime of joy, a lifetime of happiness, a lifetime of peace, and an abundance of pachisi. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.